No one wanted to buy the Comanche bride until the silent rancher stepped forward. The dusty morning sun rose slowly over the small frontier town, spilling light across the worn wooden buildings and the uneven, dirt-covered streets. The town had a restless energy, the kind that only a place with too many people for too little work could hold. Merchants shouted over each other, wagons rattled past, and the air smelled of dry earth and smoke from the cooking fires. But today the usual chatter was mixed with curiosity and even a hint of unease. At the center of the town, a small crowd had gathered in the open yard of the trading post. A wooden platform had been built, and atop it stood the young woman who everyone called the Comanche bride. Her posture was straight, her dark eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of pride and nervousness. She wore a simple dress, hand-stitched and plain, but it did nothing to hide the strength in her frame. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, slightly tangled from the long journey to reach this town. She stood quietly, knowing that every eye in the yard was on her. The auctioneer, a man with a loud voice and a sharp tongue, stood beside her, gesturing broadly. "Step right up, folks. A rare chance today." A Comanche bride, strong and healthy, ready to join a new household. Who'll offer the first bid? A long, uncomfortable pause. The crowd murmured among themselves, exchanging glances that were a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Some whispered about the dangers of taking a native bride. Others wondered about her age or her skills. Some simply laughed, mocking the idea that anyone would want her. Minutes passed. No one stepped forward. The young woman held herself still, though her heart raced. She had been through a long journey, leaving her family and everything familiar behind. And now she faced a strange world where people's eyes weighed heavier than their words. She felt the tension like a thick cloak pressing down on her shoulders. From the edge of the crowd, a few townsfolk muttered among themselves, "Why would anyone want her? She's not like us. She'll bring trouble, mark my words. She's too proud to follow orders." Each word stung, though she tried to keep her face calm. She knew that showing fear or weakness would only make her appear less valuable in their eyes. Her hands, resting at her sides, were steady, but inside a storm of emotion churned. Fear, anger, hope, and a strange longing for someone to see her worth. The auctioneer waved his hand, frustration creeping into his voice. "Come on, folks. Don't be shy. She's strong, smart, and healthy. A real opportunity." Still, no one moved. The crowd shifted uneasily, as if sensing that something unusual was happening. It was clear. No one wanted her. Some buyers had hoped for a quick deal, expecting others to act first. But the hesitation grew, and with each passing minute, the young woman's hope dimmed a little. Then, from the back of the crowd, a quiet figure stepped forward. He moved with calm confidence, not shouting, not gesturing, just moving. The townsfolk noticed him immediately. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with weathered hands and a face that had seen many seasons. His clothes were plain, dusty from travel, but neat and sturdy. Unlike the others, he did not speak to anyone. He simply walked up to the auctioneer. The crowd murmured in surprise. "That's him?" one man asked, disbelief in his voice. "Who would he be?" "The silent rancher?" another whispered. The auctioneer paused, his voice faltering slightly. You want a bid?" The rancher nodded once, silently. He counted his coins carefully, offering more than anyone else might have dared. The auctioneer took the money quickly, trying to regain control of the moment, but the crowd was silent, watching in astonishment. The Comanche bride felt a sudden rush of relief and confusion. Who was this man? Why had he chosen her when no one else would? She was gently lifted onto a wagon by the helpers, her hands resting lightly on the sides. She did not speak. She could feel the crowd's eyes burning into her back as the wagon moved away. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe, but relief was mixed with uncertainty. What kind of man would buy her, and what would life with him be like? The wagon rumbled along the dusty road toward the ranch, which lay a few miles outside the town. The silence between the bride and the rancher was not uncomfortable. It was simply there, a shared quiet that said more than words could. She studied him out of the corner of her eye. There was a calmness about him, a quiet strength, as if he understood more than anyone in the town could. She wondered what kind of life he led, and whether he would see her as a person or just property. The landscape changed as they left the town behind. Dry plains stretched in every direction, dotted with sagebrush and wildflowers. The sun climbed higher, warming the backs of the horses pulling the wagon. The Comanche bride looked around, noticing how vast and untamed the land was. It was beautiful, yes, but harsh, a place where survival depended on strength, skill, and knowledge of the earth. She remembered her family and the traditions she had grown up with. The Comanche people had taught her to ride, to track, to hunt, to respect the land and all living things. She wondered how much of that knowledge would matter in this new place. Would the rancher respect her skills, or would they be ignored like so many others had been? The rancher spoke at last, his voice low and calm. "We'll get there soon. You'll have work, but you'll be treated fairly." His words were simple, but they carried weight. There was no boast, no threat, no arrogance. Only honesty. She felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she had not been entirely lost in this strange world. The journey continued in silence, with only the creak of the wagon and the occasional call of a bird breaking the stillness. As the ranch came into view, a cluster of wooden buildings surrounded a larger house, all framed by wide-open fields and distant hills. Smoke rose from a chimney, and the ranch looked lived-in, sturdy, and secure. The Comanche bride felt a mix of fear and curiosity. She did not know what awaited her beyond those fences. Would she find kindness or cruelty, freedom or confinement? The rancher guided the wagon to a stable, and two men helped her down gently. The rancher finally looked at her directly. His eyes were steady, calm, and thoughtful. "You'll sleep tonight. Rest. Tomorrow, we begin work. You'll learn, and you'll be safe." She nodded, unsure what to say. Words felt unnecessary. She had seen enough of the world to know that actions mattered more than promises, and from what she had witnessed so far, he seemed different. Not a man who would shout or control. A man who would listen and watch. That night, in a small cabin near the main house, the Comanche bride laid down on a simple bed. She stared at the wooden beams above, letting the quiet settle over her. She thought of the auction, the crowd, the sneers and whispers, and how none of that had mattered when the silent rancher stepped forward. Sleep came slowly, her mind wandering through fear, hope, and curiosity. She knew that life on the ranch would not be easy. The work would be hard, the rules strict, and the world outside often unkind. But for the first time in many months, she felt a small glimmer of safety. A man had chosen her, not for pity, not for amusement, but for some sense of fairness. That choice, simple as it seemed, carried more weight than any words the auctioneer or the town could offer. Outside, the ranch lay still under a sky scattered with stars. The silent rancher stood for a moment on the porch, looking at the horizon. He was alone in the quiet as he always had been, but tonight There was a new presence in his life, someone whose courage and strength could match his own. He did not speak her name, and he did not need to. Actions would speak louder than words in the days to come. And so the Comanche bride and the silent rancher began a story neither could have predicted. One marked by challenge, trust, and the slow building of respect between two people from very different worlds. The first day was over, but the journey had only just begun. The morning sun spilled over the wide ranch, painting the earth with soft golden light. Birds called from the trees, and the faint clatter of animals moving in the stables echoed across the open land. The Comanche bride rose slowly from the small bed in the cabin, the straw mattress stiff beneath her. She rubbed her arms, feeling the chill of the early morning air, and took a deep breath, trying to prepare herself for what lay ahead. The ranch was quiet compared to the busy town she had left behind, yet the silence carried its own weight. Every sound seemed amplified: the soft creak of the cabin door, the low whinny of a horse, the distant flap of a barn door. She stepped outside, her bare feet brushing against the rough wooden floor of the porch, and looked across the fields. The ranch stretched wide open land bordered by low hills in the distance, dotted with wooden fences and scattered outbuildings. It was a place of hard work, and she knew the life here would be far from easy. The silent rancher was already up, standing near the barn inspecting the horses. He had moved with a natural ease, his broad shoulders relaxed, yet every movement precise. He glanced up briefly as she emerged, and though he said nothing, she felt his eyes on her. It was not a stare meant to judge or intimidate, but one that observed, understood, and quietly measured, the kind of look that made her feel seen in a way no one in the town had ever done. "You'll start with the horses," he said finally, his voice calm and firm. "They need feeding, grooming, and care. You'll learn quickly if you pay attention." She nodded. Words felt unnecessary. Actions would teach her more than explanations. She moved toward the barn, following the path he had walked so many times before. The horses watched her approach, their ears flicking and nostrils flaring. She had ridden and cared for animals before, but these were different, larger, wilder, more aware of their surroundings. Her hands, though careful, were sure and practiced. She brushed the horses' coats, cleaned their hooves, and offered them water, feeling the tension in their muscles as she worked. She spoke softly to them in her native tongue, and to her surprise, one of the horses relaxed under her touch, leaning into her hand as she stroked its mane. She felt a small sense of pride, a confirmation that even in a strange land, her skills mattered. The rancher watched quietly from the side, his arms crossed, nodding slightly as he observed her. He did not speak, but his presence was steady, a silent support that allowed her to feel less alone. She noticed the way he moved among the animals, the way he handled them with respect and patience. There was no force, no harsh words, only understanding and quiet authority. She realized that this was a man who knew the land and its creatures intimately. As the morning passed, she learned more about the ranch than she had expected. She followed the rancher to the fields, where they checked fences, repaired broken boards, and cleared the dry brush. The work was hard, far harder than the tasks she had performed before, but it was honest work. She could feel her muscles ache, her hands blister, yet a strange sense of satisfaction grew inside her. Here, effort and skill were recognized, not mocked. During a short break, she sat on a wooden fence and watched the rancher as he repaired a gate. The way he worked was methodical, patient, yet strong. She wondered what had shaped him into such a man, what life had taught him the value of silence, the power of observation, and the strength in quiet action. She wanted to know more about him, but she also knew that he would only share on his own terms. Respect, she reminded herself, came with patience. By midday, the sun hung high, casting harsh shadows across the land. The Comanche bride had learned to handle the horses, repair fences, and manage the small herd of cattle. She was tired, her body sore, but she felt a growing sense of pride. For the first time since leaving her family, she felt useful, valued not as a curiosity or commodity, but as someone who could contribute, someone who could make a difference. The rancher approached her then, carrying 2 cups of water. He handed one to her without a word, standing beside her as she drank. The silence between them was comfortable, not heavy. It was a silence that spoke of understanding, of mutual recognition, of trust slowly forming. She felt her heart lift slightly, realizing that perhaps she had found a place where her worth was seen. "You're learning fast," he said at last, his voice low but not unkind. "You have skill, and you notice details. That matters more here than anything else." She looked at him, surprised at the genuine praise. She had expected criticism, or perhaps indifference, but not this acknowledgement. "Thank you," she replied quietly. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, soft and almost shy. She was not used to being thanked, to being recognized. The rancher nodded once and turned back to the work. She watched him for a moment, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this man, really? Why had he stepped forward at the auction when no one else would? And why did his quiet presence feel safer than the noise of the town, even though she barely knew him? As the day wore on, other tasks kept them busy. She learned to mend clothes, cook simple meals over an open fire, and clean the cabins. Each task, though ordinary, was a lesson in patience, focus, and pride in one's work. The rancher offered guidance when needed, but never hovered, allowing her space to learn and adapt. The Comanche bride began to see that this man valued effort, honesty, and respect above all else. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with hues of pink and orange, the Comanche bride and the rancher sat outside the main house. The air was calm, the land quiet except for the occasional call of a distant coyote. She felt a small sense of peace she had not known since leaving her family. Here, under this wide sky, she felt the possibility of a new beginning. The rancher spoke then, breaking the long silence. "You may find it hard to trust at first. That's natural. But know this, you are safe here. You have a place, and your skills are needed." She nodded, feeling the weight of his words. Safety, she realized, was rare, a place where her skills mattered even rarer. She looked at him, noticing the depth in his eyes, the calm determination, and the quiet kindness. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope. Night fell slowly over the ranch. The stars emerged, scattered like diamonds across the black velvet sky. The Comanche bride lay in her small cabin, thinking about the day, the work, the quiet respect, and the steady presence of the rancher. She wondered about the days ahead, about the life she might build here, and about the strange bond that was forming with the man who had chosen her when no one else would. She knew that challenges would come. Life on the ranch was hard, and the world beyond its fences could be cruel. But for the first time she felt that she might not face them alone. She had her skills, her courage, and perhaps, slowly, a sense of belonging. Outside, the silent rancher stood for a moment under the stars, looking out over the land. He had been alone for many years, accustomed to solitude and silence. But tonight, with the Comanche bride on his ranch, he felt a subtle shift. There was someone new in his life, someone whose strength and spirit matched the challenges of this land. He did not speak her name, and he did not need to. Actions, care, and respect would build the foundation of their connection, stronger than words ever could. And so, the second day on the ranch ended, not with a dramatic event or a loud declaration, but with quiet understanding and mutual respect. The Comanche bride was learning, growing, and discovering that even in a harsh, unfamiliar world, there was room for trust, courage, and hope. The silent rancher had shown her a path that was not easy, but it was real, and for the first time she felt that she might belong. The night wrapped the ranch in a blanket of calm. The horses rested, the wind whispered through the trees, and the two figures, so different yet somehow connected, prepared to face the challenges of tomorrow. The story of the Comanche bride and the silent rancher was only beginning, but the foundation had been laid in trust, respect, and the first quiet steps of understanding between two people from very different worlds. The sun rose slowly over the ranch, spilling its first golden light across the wide fields. The Comanche bride awoke with a sense of purpose. Her body ached from the work of the previous day, but she welcomed the soreness. It was proof that she was learning, that she was becoming part of this new world, part of the land itself. She dressed quickly, fastening her simple dress and tying her hair back so it would not get in the way of work. Outside, the ranch was already alive with activity. Horses shifted in their stalls, snorting softly, while the cattle lowed in the distance. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and earth, a sharp, clean scent that reminded her of home. The rancher was already at work, his movements calm and precise as he inspected the fences along the far pasture. She watched him for a moment, noting the way he moved with quiet confidence. Every step purposeful, every gesture. "Good morning," he said simply, his voice low, carrying over the soft sounds of the ranch. She nodded, her own voice barely above a whisper. "Good morning." There was no need for more words. The rancher rarely spoke unless necessary, but when he did, each word carried meaning. She had learned that patience and attention were more important here than chatter. Actions mattered more than declarations. Her tasks for the day were clear: help tend the animals, repair broken fences, and gather firewood for the cabin. Each task was challenging in its own way. The horses were restless, their muscles tight from long rides or hard work. The cattle needed careful attention to prevent them from wandering, and the land itself seemed to demand respect. A misstep in the tall grass or uneven ground could lead to injury. The Comanche bride moved with care, her hands steady as she fed the animals and checked their hooves. The rancher observed from a distance, occasionally offering a nod of approval or a brief correction. "Hold the brush firmly, but don't hurt them. Let them feel your strength, not your force." She followed his instruction, noting how the horses responded to calm but confident handling. It was a lesson not just in caring for animals, but in understanding the balance of power and respect. Each action had meaning. Each movement carried consequence. She began to see that the rancher's silence was not coldness, but a way of teaching through observation and example. By midday, the sun had climbed high, and the heat pressed down across the wide open land. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and leaned against a fence, taking a moment to catch her breath. The rancher came to stand beside her, carrying 2 cups of water. Without speaking, he handed her one, and they drank in companionable silence. "You're doing well," he said finally, his voice calm. "You notice details. You remember what I show you. That matters more than speed." She felt a small surge of pride. Praise had been rare in her life since leaving home, and it warmed her to hear that she was being seen, understood. "Thank you," she said softly. The rancher nodded and returned to his work. She watched him for a moment, curious about the man who had stepped forward when no one else had at the auction. He was quiet, yes, but not distant. There was a depth in him that she could not yet understand, a history that seemed written in the lines of his face and the way he moved across the land. The afternoon brought a new challenge. A gate in the far pasture had been damaged by a recent storm, and the cattle had already begun to gather near the fence line. The rancher motioned for her to follow, and together they walked across the uneven ground. He handed her a hammer and nails, showing her exactly how to reinforce the boards. The task required patience and strength. Her arms ached from lifting the heavy wood, and her fingers were raw from gripping the tools. Yet with each board she secured, she felt a sense of accomplishment. The fence would hold, and the cattle would be safe. She began to see that work here was not punishment, but a way to shape herself and the land around her. As they worked, the rancher spoke quietly, telling her stories of the ranch, of the seasons, of the animals and their habits. He did not speak of himself, not yet, but he shared knowledge, and she listened closely, absorbing every detail. She realized that respect and trust were built through action and understanding, not through words alone. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a soft shade of orange. The air cooled, carrying the scent of the approaching evening. The Comanche bride had learned much that day, about the animals, the land, and the rhythms of ranch life. She felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. She was tired, yes, but also stronger, more capable, more connected to the world around her. The rancher called her to help with feeding the evening meal to the animals. She worked alongside him, their movements in quiet harmony. She realized that in this place, words were not necessary for understanding. They had developed a rhythm, a silent communication that spoke louder than speech. After the chores were done, they returned to the main house. The sun had disappeared behind the hills, leaving a sky painted with stars. The Comanche bride carried water and firewood, her body sore but her spirit lighter than it had been in months. The rancher followed quietly, carrying his own bundle. That night, as she sat by the fire in her cabin, she reflected on the day. She thought about the work, the quiet guidance of the rancher, and the small victories she had achieved. Each task, each lesson, had been a step toward something greater than survival. It was a step toward trust, understanding, and self-respect. She thought of the auction, the town, and the crowd that had looked at her as if she were nothing more than a curiosity. And now, here on this ranch, she felt seen. She felt valued. The silent rancher had given her more than safety. He had given her the chance to prove herself, to show what she could do, and to be respected for it. Sleep came slowly that night, her mind alive with thoughts of the land, the animals, and the man who had chosen her. She realized that she was beginning to understand him, to see the strength in his silence, the patience in his actions, and the quiet kindness in his guidance. She felt a sense of connection that was new yet comforting, as if she had finally found a place where she could belong. The next morning brought more challenges. A sudden problem with the water supply required urgent attention, and the Comanche bride learned how to manage the system with careful precision. She followed the rancher across the fields, helping to clear debris, repair broken pipes, and ensure that the animals had enough water. The work was exhausting, yet she found satisfaction in solving problems, in seeing the results of her efforts. Throughout these days, their bond continued to grow. The Comanche bride learned to anticipate the rancher's needs, to observe the land and the animals, and to act without waiting for instruction. He, in turn, noticed her skill, her courage, and her determination. Though neither spoke of feelings, a quiet trust was forming, a recognition that they could rely on each other in this demanding, unpredictable world. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, a disturbance reached the ranch. Now, a group of riders from a nearby town had come, curious about the new arrival, and perhaps skeptical of the silent rancher's decision. The Comanche bride watched from the cabin as the rancher approached the visitors with calm authority. He did not shout, nor did he rush. He simply showed that he was in control, that the ranch was under his protection. The visitors tested him, making snide remarks and questioning his choices, but the rancher's calm demeanor and quiet confidence diffused the tension. The Comanche bride felt a surge of pride. She realized that she was not just learning to live on the ranch. She was learning to face the world with courage, under the protection and guidance of a man who respected her strength. As the riders left, she turned to the rancher, feeling a warmth in her chest that went beyond gratitude. "You handled that well," she said softly. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly. "We do what must be done," he said simply. It was not a declaration of affection nor a promise, but it carried meaning. It spoke of partnership, trust, and mutual respect. She felt a quiet reassurance, a sense that together they could face the challenges of the land and the people beyond it. The night fell, wrapping the ranch in a blanket of calm. The Comanche bride lay in her cabin, reflecting on the day's events. She had faced challenges, learned new skills, and seen the strength and wisdom of the silent rancher in action. She realized that she was changing, growing stronger and more confident, and that the bond between them was deepening in ways she could not yet name. Outside, the rancher stood on the porch, looking over the land. He had been alone for many years, accustomed to solitude and silence, but tonight, with the Comanche bride on his ranch, he felt something shift. Her presence was not a disturbance, it was a complement. Her courage, her determination, and her spirit brought new life to the ranch, and he recognized her as an equal in strength and resolve. And so, the third day on the ranch came to an end. The Comanche bride had faced new challenges, learned to navigate the land and the work, and begun to understand the silent rancher in ways that words could not express. The bond between them was growing, built on respect, trust, and shared effort. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was honest, and it was real. As the stars sparkled above the wide-open fields, both the Comanche bride and the silent rancher knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, but together they were stronger. And for the first time since leaving her home, she felt a sense of belonging, a feeling that this land, this ranch, and this quiet man might just become her new world. The sun had barely risen when a tense silence settled over the ranch. The usual morning sounds, the soft whinny of horses, the lowing of cattle, and the rustling of leaves were absent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The Comanche bride awoke with a strange sense of unease, her stomach tight with worry. She dressed quickly, pulling her hair back and stepping outside to scan the fields. The ranch stretched wide under the pale morning light. Everything seemed the same. The wooden fences, the barn, the distant hills. But something felt off. The air was heavy, filled with a quiet tension she could not explain. The rancher was already moving, his steps careful as he walked toward the barn. His face was calm, but she could see the sharp focus in his eyes, the kind that comes only when danger is near. Without a word, she joined him. Together they checked the gates and fences, inspecting each one for signs of trouble. The rancher moved with precise efficiency, but his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. She noticed how attuned he was to every sound, the snap of a twig, the distant movement of cattle, the faint echo of hooves on hard earth. She realized that the ranch was more than land and animals. It was a world that demanded constant attention, a world where one misstep could bring disaster. The danger revealed itself suddenly. From over the hill came a small group of riders, their faces hidden under wide hats, their horses moving fast. They were outsiders, men from a nearby settlement, curious or perhaps resentful about the rancher and the Comanche bride. The bride felt a sudden surge of fear. She had seen suspicion and cruelty in town, but here On this wide open land, she felt exposed and vulnerable. The rancher remained calm, positioning himself between the horses and the approaching riders. His presence was steady, commanding, but not threatening. He did not shout or draw a weapon. Instead, he relied on his quiet authority and experience to hold the situation. The Comanche bride watched him closely, feeling a mix of awe and trust. She realized that this man, who had stepped forward when no one else would, could face danger with a calmness that inspired courage. The riders slowed as they reached the ranch, their expressions unreadable. They exchanged words with the rancher, testing him with snide remarks and veiled threats. But the rancher stood firm, his voice steady and low. He spoke only when necessary, using words that carried weight and meaning. The Comanche bride felt her heart race, but she also felt a strange confidence. She had seen his strength, his wisdom, and his care for the land and animals. She knew that together they could meet any challenge. The standoff lasted only a few tense moments. The riders finally rode away, their intentions unclear, but their powerlessness evident in the face of the rancher's calm authority. The bride exhaled slowly, the tension leaving her body in a rush. She turned to the rancher, words catching in her throat. "You handled that very well," she said softly. He nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon again. "We do what must be done," he said simply. The day continued with the chores and tasks of the ranch, but the incident had left a mark. The Comanche bride moved with more confidence, more awareness. She handled the animals and tools with growing skill, her movements efficient and precise. She felt a new sense of responsibility, not just for herself, but for the ranch and the man who had trusted her. She was no longer just a newcomer. She was part of this land, part of this life. The rancher observed her quietly, noting her growing strength and courage. Though he rarely spoke of feelings, there was a subtle acknowledgement in his eyes, a recognition that she was proving herself capable, resilient, and brave. She was no longer just someone he had bought at an auction. She was a partner in the life they were building together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, a different kind of challenge arose. A sudden storm approached from the hills, dark clouds rolling quickly across the sky. The wind picked up, rattling the wooden buildings and sending dust swirling across the fields. The bride and the rancher worked together to secure the animals, bring in the cattle, and tie down loose equipment. The rain began as a light drizzle, then turned into a heavy downpour, soaking the land and testing their endurance. The Comanche bride felt the storm's power, the wind tugging at her clothes, the rain soaking through her hair. Yet she did not falter. She had learned from the rancher how to remain calm, how to focus on the task at hand, and how to trust in her own skills. She worked steadily, moving with purpose and determination, feeling a deep connection to the land and the man who guided her. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the ranch wet but intact. The animals were safe, the fences had held, and the buildings had survived the wind. The Comanche bride and the rancher stood together on the porch, looking out at the fields glistening under the moonlight. She felt a sense of pride and accomplishment, not just for surviving the storm, but for learning to face challenges with courage and skill. The rancher spoke quietly, his voice barely above the sound of the dripping rain. "You've done well today. You've proven yourself." She looked at him, feeling a warmth in her chest that went beyond gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. He nodded once, his eyes steady. "You could have. You have strength, and you have courage. That is what matters." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They spoke of respect, trust, and recognition. The Comanche bride felt a deep sense of belonging, a feeling she had not known since leaving her family. She realized that this life, though hard and unpredictable, was one where she could be herself, where her skills and courage were valued, and where she could find safety and respect. The following days brought more challenges, each testing their endurance, skill, and teamwork. A sick horse required careful attention. A broken fence threatened to let the cattle escape, and harsh weather tested their resilience. Through it all, the Comanche bride and the rancher worked together, learning from each other, relying on each other, and building a quiet partnership based on respect and trust. She learned more about the rancher as well. Though he rarely spoke of his past, his actions revealed a life shaped by experience, patience, and careful observation. He treated the land and animals with respect, and he treated her the same way. She realized that his silence was not emptiness, but a choice, a way of showing that actions and character mattered more than words. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, the bride and rancher sat outside by a small fire. The air was cool and the land stretched endlessly before them. She felt a sense of peace she had not known for a long time. She looked at the rancher, noticing the lines of his face, the calm strength in his posture, and the quiet wisdom in his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for choosing me, for giving me this chance." He did not smile, but there was a warmth in his gaze. "You chose yourself as well," he said simply. "You have courage. You have skill. You deserve a place here." The words struck her deeply. She had left her home not knowing if she would find safety, respect, or belonging. Now, she felt that she had found all three. The rancher had not just saved her from a difficult situation. He had given her a life where she could grow, learn, and thrive. The night stretched on, the stars sparkling above the open fields. The Comanche bride lay in her cabin, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From the auction to the quiet ranch, from fear to courage, from isolation to trust, she had come far in a short time. She felt a sense of gratitude, not just for her own survival, but for the chance to be part of something larger, a life of purpose, respect, and connection. Outside, the rancher stood for a moment on the porch, looking over the land. He had been alone for many years, used to silence and solitude, but now, with the Comanche bride by his side, he felt a subtle shift in his world. Her presence was not a burden, but a gift. Her courage, strength, and spirit complemented his own, and together they had faced danger, learned from each other, and built a quiet, unspoken bond. The days that followed brought challenges and victories, but each moment strengthened the connection between them. The Comanche bride grew more confident in her skills, more aware of the land, and more trusting of the rancher. He, in turn, recognized her value, her bravery, and her determination. They were no longer just protector and protected. They were partners, united by respect, courage, and shared experience. As the story of the Comanche bride and the silent rancher came to this quiet resolution, the land itself seemed to reflect their journey. The ranch, once just fields and buildings, had become a home. The animals, once strangers, had become companions. And the bond between two very different people, brought together by circumstance, had grown into a quiet, enduring trust. In the stillness of the night, with the stars shining over the wide open fields, the Comanche bride finally felt what she had longed for since leaving her family. A place where she belonged, a life filled with purpose, and a man who saw her as she truly was. She had survived fear, hardship, and uncertainty, and now she had found courage, respect, and connection. The journey was not easy, but it had led to a life of quiet strength, trust, and hope, a life worth living together.